Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? And it is day 14 of RPG A Day 2017. It's question 14, August 14th. Let's see, what is our question? Our question is, which RPG do you prefer for open-ended campaign play? Well, this is one that gave me a little bit of trouble. This could have been a really simple question to answer. I could just say, well, all of them. But I wanted to look deeper. Um, During the questions about 2-hour sessions and about the short 10-session campaigns, many of the participants in RPG A Day predictably kind of expressed a predilection for a certain type of play. So many of us, ended up sounding like broken records. So I really wanted to kind of explore a little bit why I prefer open-ended campaign play before I kind of give my answers. Now, if you watch my channel, you kind of know that I gravitate towards that. I'm less of a fan of one-shots or of, shorter campaigns. But why is that? And I'm not saying they're better. I'm just saying that's my preference. So I've said this before, but I recall, like in childhood, and as far as I can remember, I was, voracious reader when I was a kid, and I try to read more now, and I have trouble reading and concentrating, which is very annoying. But I'd finish a book, and I always wish the story had gone on. Like, shouldn't there be more? And I think of stories I've read, some years back now, but like, read Neverwhere. Didn't ever see the series. I read the book Neverwhere, and of course, I'm wondering at the end, well, what happens to Dora and Richard Mayhew, in London Below? The character, the Marquis, seemed to offer this way back to Richard at the very end. But what happened next? I hear that he's actually going to write a sequel to that, which sounds kind of cool, so I'd be really interested. I read the book Glory Road by Robert Heinlein, one of my all-time favorites, even though it's a little campy and everything. But what happens to Scar after Glory Road ends? Rufo shows back up, and, well, he's got an invite to go back on the road. But what happens? And I always want to know. Well, and I would imagine what might happen. I'd read the Narnia books or whatever, as a kid, and I just think, well, what happened? What happened in the middle? Or during all those years where you don't really hear anything. When the four Pevensey children are all in Narnia as kings and queens, and then they finally go back. What happened in all those years? It couldn't just be the horse and his boy. Other stuff should have happened. What was it? I wanted to know. I used to daydream about it, think about it. Now, some stories, offer you a tease of a continuing story overtly, like the Neverwhere and Glory Road. A lot of stories simply end, but they leave you wanting more. And I think that's the hallmark of a good book or a good TV show or whatever, is it kind of leaves you wanting more. But that, I wanted more. How am I going to get it? And I used to think about it. As long as I can remember, too, from childhood, I made up stories in my head, thought of ideas. Sometimes they were disjointed stories. They were more like themes or ideas. But, I'd often come back to them over and over again. And sometimes I'd add more elements. And I've done that into adulthood. Just in there kind of daydreaming, and some little, idea or premise or something kind of occurs to me. And sometimes it just shows up and I think about it for a while. Now, on a personal note, and this is kind of shifting gears a little bit because I am talking about personal stuff. I can understand the lure of immortality, and this speaks to one of the other reasons I like open-ended games. I think, Anyway Be Damned. I read books like this, guilty pleasure. I liked reading Anne Rice books, and whether it was Ramses the Damned, or whether you're going to be a mummy, and or whether you're going to be more like Lestat or Louis. I found those the idea of immortality always has been very compelling to me. So anyway, be damned. I don't care if I'm get world weary. And honestly, I really don't want to live forever. I know it's not possible, but really, I want to see what happens next. What do we do next? What happens in my life next? What do we do as a species next? Do we get to Mars? I kind of regret sometimes that my life's going to end, and I don't get to see what the human race does next. And there was a period of time, where life was really dark for me, and without getting too personal, like things like suicide seemed like a real option. But even then, one of the things that kept me going was I wanted to see what happened next. I didn't want to miss out. I mean, there were other things that kept me going, but that was one of them. That was a big one. Just want to see, even though life seems bleak, what does happen next? I want to know. I've always had this need for discovery. I read the book, I think it's a Wizard's First Rule. I think it's the book where the guy's a truth seeker, and I identified, I'm a seeker. I want to know what happens next. What's the truth? What happens next? So that said, that personal stuff aside, I understand the desire to experience many different games and genres. The idea that you're going to have to go out and play all these little one-shots and miniature campaigns. I mean, hell, I'm playing catch-up right now. It's a lot of games are on my radar, a lot, because I had a big break, between, where I just didn't play for a long time, and then, I played mostly one style of games, and now I'm really enjoying going out and branching out to all kinds of stuff. So there's all kinds of games on my radar. That said, not that I'm not going to explore these games, but at my core, I'm a person that prefers to explore and understand things fully, no matter what it is. So it's harder for me to simply put something back on the shelf, never to return. It's funny, I look around here, I got a good deal of books, probably too many. But some of these books are like old favorites, and they're in rotation, and I'm comforted by taking out those old friends every once in a while, taking them out for a spin, reading the same book I've read before, so. Maybe, now we're getting deep into my psyche here, so you're along for the ride whether you want to be or not. Perhaps things like that are a method of producing some kind of predictability and security, both of which were in short supply when I was growing up, without getting too detailed. And so maybe those things, wanting the familiar, wanting to really kind of hang on to something that I really like, that's probably part of my psyche. Also, I understand the desire to experience a lot of different themes and genres, explore all, various types of genres, and doing so requires one to play a lot of games. And often these games are going to have some kind of loose story arc, sometimes a firm story arc, or sometimes just an agreement to stick to a specific kind of genre, like this is what we're going to emulate. I'm thinking of games like, All for One, where we're going to emulate being musketeers, one way, shape, or form. It's going to be, a supernatural musketeer horror, but we're going to be musketeers. So a game like Tech Noir, which I just got, it's very prescriptive. This is what you're going to do. You're going to, you're all going to agree to create a noir story, or stick to that noir genre, and that's really, it's very codified in that game. Something like Hollow Earth Expedition, where you're going to, it's going to be a pulp genre. And this specific kind of Call of Cthulhu or any of the Lovecraftian games out there, well, you're going to be emulating this specific genre. And all of these require that the players agree to play their characters in a manner that supports that particular genre. And some, like Tech Noir, are very, very prescriptive about it. Like, here's what you're going to do. Here's what you shouldn't do. This is the kind of character you should not create because it's no longer noir. All right. So, that said, without taking anything away from enforcing genre itself, sometimes there's no planned story arc. Maybe the game master set up like an open world. I like an open world. But maybe they had an idea for how they thought events would play out, open world or not. However, that quote, I think it's John Lennon, was the one that said, "Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans." And emergent stories, the kind of stories I like, emergent stories don't really care very much what the plans of the game master or, frankly, of the players are. They tend to take on a life of their own. This is the kind of gameplay I enjoy the most. Even if we're trying to experience a certain kind of theme or genre, as long as we stick to that, I like it when nobody could have predicted what was going to happen next because there were several people involved in making this game experience happen. And as a game master, I've had my plans derailed or my ideas derailed, what I thought was going to happen, and I've also been the guy blowing up the tracks and derailing the train. In both of these scenarios, these were some of my most enjoyable games. I like that. Switching gears a little bit, someone mentioned that long campaigns. I think it might have been Null Inquisitor. I'm not sure because I've watched a ton of videos. So if you're like me, you've watched a bunch and you're still trying to digest and catch up. Somebody mentioned that long campaigns were really just probably a series of shorter stories strung together. And all I could think of when I was listening to that was, well, yeah, of course. It's just like real life, just like real history. Everything's just a bunch of little shorter, miniature stories or events or series of events or little arcs, this little thing that happened. They're all strung together. I recall in a play-by-post game I played in years ago, my character, we're playing first edition D&D, and we're playing module to module for the most part. Those little things that happen in between. But my character became charmed by a barmaid in a module. Not magically charmed. I just thought she was hot. This Tavanantha. I forget if she's really in the module or not. I can't remember. So if anybody remembers who Tavanantha the barmaid is, that might be kind of funny. But my character fell in love with her. And so his ultimate plan was to gain enough money and fame to go back and marry her. And sometimes he would send letters back. He'd send money back to her. And I'm not sure if the game master knew what to do with this. Maybe just humored me. But to me, that was, my character had plans. And there was a real world and a real possible future for him outside of this immediate campaign. So you take a guy like that. maybe a retired character from a campaign. Maybe you're running a campaign, and we had characters retire all the time. Just start playing new guys. What brings them out of retirement? It could be like a bit like recruiting, John Malkovich in Red, or Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. The campaign continues all of a sudden. My character Aprax, the guy that sent the money back to Tavanantha, he could theoretically come out of retirement to join like Elathin and Nori and Valen and Mayor, even though we haven't played that game in 5 years. Theoretically, we could all just start up again. And sometimes you just like to take that old book off the shelf. And I still wonder what happens in some of the games I was in. What happened to Chuck and Halsey in the Hollow Earth? When they're surrounded by the cat people. What about Midnight and Bruce and the Doctor? Did we go in that digger and go down to the Hollow Earth? Did we help? I can't remember his name now, but the little funny little man. Did we help him find the waters of life? What happened down there in the Hollow Earth as we went down there? Discovering what happens next is what keeps me excited and motivated to keep playing. So anyhow, now that I've just rambled on and on about how why I like open-ended play. So what games? Clearly OSR games. Take your pick. They all work well for that. Something like Desolation. That's 18 months after the apocalypse, but I could easily see, what happens. You play that game. What happens 5 years from the apocalypse, or 5 years after? What about 50 years after? What about 1,000? You could play it continuously. You could jump. Be kind of interested. Interesting to see what happens with that world. I'd be interested. Something like Hollow Earth Expedition. It's firmly rooted in the pulp genre, so cliffhangers are a staple. And tune in next time instills in you a faith that there will be a next time. Ergo, you can have open-ended play for a long, long time. Past World War II, past the Korean War. You could play Hex forever, theoretically. Not that you'd want to, maybe you want to stick in that era, but you know what I mean? Anything emulating something like Star Wars, I could see easily have that kind of vibe where, what happens next. I can see, likewise, anything Lovecraftian, much like the much anticipated Leagues of Cthulhu, being able to be played throughout the ages. Whether you start way back in time or you have flashbacks, but you could play that game forever. Might be playing with different characters because they might die and get turned inside out, but you know what I mean. A game like Broken Rooms, which I'm really hot to play, it has the apparent problem of convergence. If you haven't, experienced the game, or go check it out, because you'll find out convergence, everything's coming back together. But nobody really knows what happens when convergence happens, or do they? What happens? Let's find out. So at the end of the day, what's the best game? It's the game or the genre or the emerging story that has you wanting to turn the page and see what's around the next corner. The one that has you wanting to tune in next week to find out what happens to our heroes as they're trapped in the path of the oncoming train. It's the story of the game that has you anxiously waiting for the next book or the next season of your TV series, wondering how the relationships the protagonists have with each other, the relationships they have with their adversaries, and even the relationships they have with themselves. How do those relationships develop? The best game for open-ended play is the one that you keep thinking about, the one you keep wondering, what happens next? What happens?